Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Drew, Chair of the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, calling our November meeting to order. Ms. Grantham, will you call the roll?
Yes. Department of Commerce,
Kate Kelly, present.
Department of Ecology,
Eli Levitt, present.
Department of Fish and Wildlife,
Mike Livingston, present.
Department of Natural Resources,
Lenny Young, present.
Utilities and Transportation Commission,
Stacy Brewster, present.
Local Government and Optional State Agencies. For the Horse Heaven Project, Department of Agriculture, Derek Sanderson,
Derek Sanderson, present.
Benton County, Ed Brost. For the Badger Mountain Project, Douglas County.
Jordan Julio, present.
For the Watoma Solar Project, Benton County, Dave Sharp.
Dave Sharp, present.
Washington State Department of Transportation, Paul Gonseth.
Paul Gonseth, present.
The Assistant Attorney General.
John Thompson, present.
Thank you. Administrative Law Judges, Adam Torum,
This is Judge Torum. I'm here.
Laura Bradley,
This is Judge Bradley, present.
Dan Gerard.
Judge Gerard, present.
For EFSEC staff, Sonia Bumpus, Amy Hofkemeyer,
Amy Hofkemeyer, present.
Amy Moon,
Amy Moon, present.
Patty Betts,
Patty Betts, present.
Stu Henderson,
Stu Henderson, present.
Joan Owens,
Joan Owens, present.
Dave Walker,
Walker, present.
Sonia Scavland,
Sonia Scavland, present.
Lisa Massengale, Sarah Rudolph,
Sarah Randolph, present.
Sean Green,
Sean Green, present.
Lance Caputo,
Lance Caputo, present.
John Barnes,
But
for the operation. Oh,
happening.
is that John Barnes?
Last year, and that's going to happen as well. And I will.
If you have an open mic, please make sure to mute it. For the operational updates, Kittitas Valley Wind Project,
Eric Melbardis, present.
Wild Horse Wind Power Project,
Jennifer Galbraith, present.
Grays Harbor Energy Center,
Grays Harbor Energy Center, Chris Sharon is present.
Chehalis Generation Facility,
Mike Adams, present.
Columbia Generating Station,
Dennis Mahinagich, present.
Columbia Solar,
Owen Hurd, present.
and for the Council for the Environment,
Megan Salome.
Chair, there is a quorum for the regular council, the Horse Heaven Council, Badger Mountain, and the Watoma Councils. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the proposed agenda. You did see a revised agenda that recently just came out, which, Ms. Grantham, can you tell me again what the change was between the earlier agenda and the revised agenda?
Yes, so the revision was under Horse Heaven Wind Farm. It is the DEIS update. Before it was the SEPA update, and we have Amy Moon covering that.
Thank
Switching chairs.
That should be corrected on lines 17 and 20 of page 11.
And it should be
TRITIUM.
TIUM. Thank you. Other corrections?
I'm sorry. This is Brianna Figueres. I'm the stenographer. My audio is cutting out. I don't. Is anybody else missing the other end of that conversation? Because I didn't hear anything else.
Yeah, I had about a 45-second.
This is Dave Sharp. My audio has been off also.
Can you hear us now?
We can, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Chair, can you please start over from the beginning of the minutes just to get the record corrected?
Okay.
Thank you.
Am I being heard now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So the corrections to the minutes, starting with page 24, line 1, interested party, singular should be parties plural. And on page 11, lines 17 and 20, TRIDUUM should be TRITIUM. Was that heard by everybody?
Yep.
Stenographer, please, Brianna. Did you get that?
Yes, I can hear. Thank you.
Okay.
Dave Sharp heard.
Thank you. Okay, so now, any other corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from October 18th as corrected, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Meeting minutes are approved. Moving on to our operational updates, Kittitas Valley Wind Project, Mr. Melbardis.
Good afternoon, EFSEC staff, Chair Drew. This is Eric Melbardis with EDP Renewables for the Kittitas Valley Wind Power Project. We have nothing non-routine to report for the period. We're just getting our site in shape for winter.
Thank you. Wild Horse Wind Power Project, Ms. Galbraith.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew, council members and staff. This is Jennifer Galbraith with Puget Sound Energy at the Wild Horse Wind Facility, and I have nothing non-routine to report for the month of October.
Thank you. Chehalis Generation Facility. I
good
believe we
afternoon, Chair.
have Mike Adams with us.
That's correct. So good afternoon, Chair Drew, EFSEC council and staff. For the record, this is Mike Adams, plant manager, representing Pacific Core Chehalis Generation Facility. Nothing non-routine to report for the month of October. We are looking forward to tomorrow's scheduled visit by EFSEC staff and the fire marshal. I have nothing further. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Adams? Thank you.
You.
Grays Harbor Energy Center, Mr. Sharon.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members and staff. Chris Sharon, plant manager, Grace Harbor Energy Center. For the month of October, the only non-routine item we have to report is that we submitted a revised relative accuracy test audit and sulfuric acid source test result. An investigation was conducted to determine the cause of the sulfuric acid and sulfur dioxide source tests for gas turbines 1 and 2 to result in a ratio greater than the 1 in the source test report issued on September 30th. Ratio less than 1 is an unexpected result based on the theoretical calculations for converting sulfur dioxide to sulfuric acid in a gas turbine exhaust. The source test contractor investigated this issue and identified an error was made in the chain of custody paperwork and sample labels for the sulfuric acid and sulfur dioxide samples. The error resulted in a mix-up between the the sulfuric acid and the sulfur dioxide samples at the laboratory. And this caused the laboratory to report the sulfuric acid results as SO2 or sulfur dioxide, and the sulfur dioxide results as sulfuric acid. Sulfur dioxide and the sulfuric acid samples are analyzed using an identical test method at the laboratory, and there is no way to differentiate between whether a sample contains sulfuric acid or sulfur dioxide without proper sample control and labeling. The sample mix-up was identified by comparing the sulfuric acid and sulfur dioxide sample volumes. The laboratory report indicated that the sulfuric acid samples had a larger volume than the sulfur dioxide samples. For the source test contractor, the larger volume sample containers were erroneously labeled as condenser rinses or for the sulfuric acid. And when the smaller volume bottles were actual condenser rinses. The sulfuric acid, sulfur dioxide laboratory report was revised and reissued based on correctly labeled samples. Then a revised source test report was generated by the source test contractor to incorporate the revised laboratory results. The sulfuric acid, sulfur dioxide ratios in the revised report are less than 1 as expected and are similar results to those of the tests conducted in past years.
Mr. Sharon, how often do you have that test conducted?
The source tests are normally 5-year intervals.
Okay, so you found out that it was mislabeled in this instance.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from council members? Thank you for that update. And you have a little bit more here in terms of current or upcoming projects?
Yes, earlier in the year, I believe it was April, we submitted modification for their operating permit and PSD permit. Amendment 5.
And that's under review at this point?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Sharon? Thank you. Moving on to Columbia Generating Station and WNP 1 and 4. And we have Mr. Mahina. Okay, you're going to have to help me with your name, sir. Dennis? Is there someone from Energy Northwest?
Chair Drew, this is Amy Moon with EFSEC. Maybe Dennis is. Oh, there he is. There we go. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, EFSEC Council, and staff. For the record, this is Dennis Mehinagich reporting for Columbia Generating Station and for WNP 1 and 4. For October of this year, I have one item to report on. On October 26, 2022, Washington State Department of Ecology conducted a synthetic minor air permit inspection at Columbia Generating Station. The purpose of the inspection was to assess the station's compliance with EFSEC Order number 873. The inspectors conducted a visual inspection of diesel generators and the auxiliary boiler. No deficiencies were noted by Ecology during the walk down and exit meetings. Those are all the updates I have for October.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Mehinagic? Okay, thank you. Columbia Solar Project, Mr. Hurd.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members, and EFSEC staff. This is Owen Hurd from Tuso Energy reporting on the Columbia Solar projects. Penstemon is currently operational. There was a question last week about the generation thus far. And so for the month of October, we had 796 megawatt hours of generation. So it works out to about a 21% capacity factor. And I think there were a couple days in there where the plant was taken offline. So that may stabilize a little bit higher than where it currently is. Camus is currently operational, and next month we can include generation data from that. And then Urtica, we finally achieved the PSE witness test. We completed that mechanical completion. So we're now just marching towards substantial completion, which is expected on the 23rd. And then we have some rocks on site that need to be removed off of Urtica, and then we'll begin seeding shortly after that. That's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Horse Heaven Wind Farm. Ms.
Good.
Moon with the
Yes,
DEIS update.
Thank you, Chair Drew. Good afternoon, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Amy Moon, an EFSEC staff member. I'm providing a draft environmental impact statement or draft EIS update on the Horse Heaven Wind project. EFSEC staff continued our work preparing the draft EIS. We are focused on finalizing the document for a late fall publication, including compiling the draft EIS sections into a cohesive document and finalization of an executive summary and fact sheet. As a reminder, a minimum 30-day comment period is required. However, due to the timing of the draft EIS issuance, EFSEC is extending this by 15 days, as allowed by the Washington Administrative Code 197-11-455, and that's item 7 in that WAC. This is to allow the public time to review in light of the winter holidays. Any questions on that?
So the
Okay.
45 days would begin from the date of issuance of the DEIS. So they've not begun yet in terms of the
Correct.
comment period.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. And then I also wanted to thank the EFSEC Council for attending the Horse Heaven site tour on November 1st. And although the weather was wet and rainy for that tour, the site tour hopefully will provide helpful information in understanding the proposed project, the existing environment, and project impact analysis during your review of that draft EIS. Does the council have any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Moon? Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're now moving to the DEIS presentation by Patricia Betts. Ms. Betts?
Greetings, Chair Drew, EFSEC Council and staff, and the public. For the record, my name is Patricia Betts. I provide support to EFSEC for implementing the State Environmental Policy Act for the Horse Heaven proposals, environmental review, and EIS preparation.
Can you pause for just a minute? Is there a way we can have the volume up?
I apologize. Is that
That's
better?
okay.
Okay. I have prepared a presentation to provide some basic information about an environmental impact statement and to talk a little bit about the contents of this EIS and about reviewing it. I'm happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. I have not prepared a long list of slides, but I do have a fair amount of information that I'd like to share with each of those that I have prepared. So
Okay, if you can just move closer to your microphone, because we are having a little bit of trouble hearing you, that would be great.
Is this better?
Just a little bit.
Okay, all right. 1 second and I will move my laptop closer to me. Okay, is this any better?
Quite a bit, thank you.
Okay, all right. So if we can move to the first slide, what is an environmental impact statement? So SEPA stands for the State Environmental Policy Act. And in regards to what an EIS is, I'm going to just talk about 4 basic points on what an EIS analyzes and when an EIS is prepared. An EIS requires agencies with an agency action on a proposal to consider the adverse environmental impacts of the proposal prior to making a decision whether to approve with conditions, or deny the proposal. It's prepared when there is an indication the proposal would or could result in significant adverse environmental impacts, or when the agency and the applicant agree an EIS is the best approach for analyzing the impacts of the proposal. And I believe in the case of this project, we did, the applicant and EFSEC ultimately did agree that an EIS was the best path forward for this project or for this proposal. An EIS analyzes the adverse environmental impacts of the proposal and identifies mitigation that could reduce those impacts. It also examines any alternatives to the proposal that would meet the objectives of that proposal, but with lower environmental consequences. And it generally does not examine positive environmental impacts of the proposal, except when those positive impacts could be mitigating identified adverse environmental impacts that are in the EIS. A draft EIS provides the public, local, state, and federal agencies and tribal governments the opportunity to comment on the completeness and accuracy of the EIS before it is finalized. And then thirdly, the EIS analyzes environmental impacts and must be used by agency decision makers along with other relevant considerations or documents in making final decisions on a proposal. So it is not the only document or considerations that will be used by decision makers to decide whether to approve with conditions, or deny the proposal. For example, decision makers may take the general welfare, social, economic, and state policy into account in weighing and balancing alternatives and in making final decisions. So it's a very important document, but it's not the only piece of information that decision makers use. We can move to the next slide. So the table presented on this slide will be found at the end of chapter 1, and it provides a little bit of information about each of the chapters, and I'm just going to briefly talk about those. There's an executive summary, and it is not intended as a standalone document. It provides fundamental information, but each chapter, such as 2, 3, 4, and 5, provides a more complete discussion. The executive summary includes a large summary table. However, the tables at the end of each resource section in chapter 4 provide a more comprehensive assessment and directly reflect the information provided in that resource section's narrative. The executive summary also includes a comprehensive list of key issues, and those are not discussed in other chapters of the document. So that is specific to the executive summary. Chapter 1, purpose of action, provides an introduction to the proposal, the applicant, the SEPA process, agency decision making, and maybe a short, a very, very brief discussion or short summary of the key issues. The chapter 2, the information in chapter 2 is the applicant's description of their proposal. It covers construction, operation, and decommissioning. The applicant identified a maximum footprint for the proposal so that the adverse environmental impacts of all possible components would be analyzed. This chapter also provides a collated list of applicant commitments. So if a reader has a question about what the proposal will entail, this section should provide that information. Alternatives are also discussed at the end of chapter 2. The proposal is also known as an action alternative. And so there is also a no action alternative, which analyzes the impacts to the environment if the proposal were not permitted and constructed. And this provides a comparison of environmental impacts with and without the project. Only one action alternative was analyzed in the draft EIS, which is the applicant's proposal. Although there are no other action alternatives, the EIS does examine the specific adverse environmental impacts of some of the components of the proposal. For example, it examines the turbine option of up to 150 taller turbines and the turbine option of up to 244 shorter turbines and the 3 different solar array locations. And so this additional information about each of those components can identify which, if any, of those components are contributing to a medium or high impact, and will assist in further examination of possible options to mitigate the impact of those components and ultimately reduce the impact of the comprehensive proposal. Chapter 3 is about the project. I'm sorry. It's about the environment, the existing or affected environment is covered in Chapter 3, and the project, because the project is going to cause disturbance and impacts to environmental resources, it's important for us to know what the existing condition is of the resources that are going to be affected by the project. There's actually 14 environmental resource topics covered in the EIS. There's the natural environment, which includes earth, air, water, vegetation, wildlife, and habitat. And then there's the built environment, which includes energy, land, and shoreline use, historic and cultural resources, visual, noise and vibration, recreation, public health and safety, transportation, public services, and utilities. Socioeconomics is normally not analyzed in an EIS. However, EFSEC's rules require socioeconomics to be analyzed. Rather than creating a separate socioeconomics document, it is included in the EIS as the 15th topic. In order to understand the impacts of the proposal, we need to first understand the existing environmental condition of the environment that could be impacted by the project. For some environmental resources, we may need to understand the environmental condition offsite as well. For example, if a project creates noise during construction, that noise may extend beyond the project site. In Chapter 3, the EIS collects information about the existing sound conditions and the type of activities, such as residential, recreation, commercial, industrial, in the areas where the project's construction noise can reach. Additionally, environmental justice impacts are examined in the socioeconomic section. Environmental justice analyzes disproportionate adverse impacts to low-income and minority populations. And that, and although, as I mentioned, socioeconomics is not a traditional part of an EIS, environmental justice issues have become a standard part of EISs. It just makes sense, though, to put it in the socioeconomics section. For Chapter 4, the impact analysis in Chapter 4 is based on the project description information provided by the applicant in Chapter 2. The terms direct and indirect relates to the impacts of the proposal on the various environmental resources. It examines the changes that would occur to the existing conditions described in Chapter 3 and translates those changes as appropriate into environmental impacts. Impacts can be very close in time and distance from the project. For example, vegetation that's removed during construction, and can also be later in time or farther in distance, but still be the result of the project. For example, the vegetation that was removed provided a food source or range area for wildlife. Both are impacts of the proposal. It is less important to worry whether an impact is direct or indirect, and more important to ensure both types of impacts are considered. And then lastly, there are a variety of options for accomplishing mitigation, and that's another discussion that occurs in Chapter 4. There may be avoidance, there may be minimization, there may be rectifying the impact, reducing or eliminating the impact over time, compensating for the impact, and or monitoring with a contingency. We consider all those forms of mitigation, and I expect you will see all those included as part of the comprehensive package of mitigation measures that have been identified for this project. And then we also have a responsibility with regards to determining significance. In SEPA, it is defined as a reasonable likelihood of more than a moderate adverse impact on environmental quality. And as my mentor often said, she would say that, suggest that that was clear as mud. And it is a very somewhat vague description of how one would determine significance. But we are required to identify significant adverse environmental impacts that cannot or will not be mitigated, and we have done so in the EIS. And as part of being able to determine significance, we've used 4 factors which will be identified as impact ratings in the EIS, and we've used 4 factors that are descriptors, you might say, or adjectives that are used for helping to identify how one is going to determine significance. And those are magnitude, duration, likelihood, and the spatial or extent or setting of the impacts. Each factor helps the reader to consider how much of an environmental concern the impact should be. And the beginning of each resource section in Chapter 4 defines these 4 factors. And then for magnitude, the description is actually covered in each resource section and is unique to that resource. So there'll be specific identifiers and descriptions for Earth and how one determines magnitude as it relates to Earth, as it relates to air, as it relates to water, and so on. And then lastly, there's the cumulative impact section. And that the cumulative impacts are those that are direct and indirect impacts of the proposal that can increase in significance when considered along with past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future projects that have also impacted the same resource. So, for example, loss of habitat within a wildlife movement corridors contributes to habitat fragmentation and barriers to wildlife by affecting an animal's ability to move between habitats on the landscape. It can present obstacles that can deter wildlife movement, such as fences or roads, and or require wildlife to expend additional energy to move around. The project has the potential to contribute to these cumulative barriers to wildlife movement, along with past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future projects. So that's an example of a cumulative impact issue that we look at in this EIS. And then cumulative impacts are, besides direct and indirect impacts, SEPA requires us to consider cumulative impacts and how the proposal contributes to those. So it's a mandatory part of analysis in an EIS. We can move to the next slide. So just wanted to maybe provide a few pointers for reviewing the draft EIS and kind of understanding the overall organization of the document. It's important to understand that all the chapters are interrelated. Don't be surprised if you end up moving between chapters as you read about a particular topic. The executive summary provides brief information about the entire EIS and provides additional context for reviewing the rest of the chapters. But it is not a summarized regurgitation of the whole document, which might be the case for or expectation when you see something labeled as an executive summary. Remember that the end of chapter 1 describes the contents of each chapter if you need a refresher of how it's all put together. And familiarize yourself with the proposal and the information in chapter 2. That's just the proposal description. And the beginning of chapter 3 and 4 provides some basic explanation about key terms and content that applies to all of chapter 3 and 4. And then use chapter 3 and 4 together. You can read about the impacts in chapter 4 and refer to the information in chapter 3 to understand how or why the impacts are identified in chapter 4. And then the end of each chapter 4 resource section also identifies the applicant commitments relevant to that resource topic, and it summarizes the impacts of the proposal and identifies mitigation and help that can help to reduce those impacts. Refer to the appendices when you want more detailed information on a particular resource discussed in chapter 4. Next slide. So providing comments on the draft EIS. EFSEC created a comment database that commenters can use to submit their comments. And the link to that database will be provided on EFSEC's Horse Heaven website along with the draft EIS. Comments should be as specific as possible and may address either the adequacy of the EIS and/or the merits of the alternatives discussed. The public is encouraged to comment on the methodology needed, additional information, and mitigation measures. For example, is information missing or incorrect? Is there additional mitigation that should be considered? Or are there impacts that are being underrated or overrated? Or, for example, you might think that just the spatial extent of an impact may be incorrectly described. Maybe instead of being local, you might think it should be more of a regional impact. Remember to provide your reasoning for why the rating should be changed. And because EFSEC is responsible for the completeness and accuracy of the information in the EIS, we review the comments and confirm any information that is provided by commenters before inserting any changes into the final EIS. So the more evidence and/or explanation as to why you think something should be changed or added or deleted will provide us with the information that we need to confirm that it's a relevant comment that we need to use for modifying the EIS or collecting additional information. There are comments that are not relevant on an EIS and they're not used for the final EIS and not used as a substantive, considered a substantive comment received. So expressions of support or opposition of the proposal are not going to be useful. Comments of the value, for another example, might be comments about the value of renewable energy or the use of fossil fuels are as well not the kind of comments that are going to help us to improve the completeness and accuracy of the EIS. And to the last slide on the final environmental impact statement. As I mentioned above, there will be a final environmental impact statement. And there are changes that occur between the draft EIS and the final EIS. Those are expected and normal. For example, for one thing, during the EIS process, projects or applicants respond to the identified environmental impacts. They often make adjustments to the proposal based on the information about impacts and mitigation in the draft EIS. Applicants may have identified other changes or details related to the proposal as a result of further work defining the proposal. So that's one kind of change that we might find between the draft and the final. Also, the project description, applicant commitments, and agency identified mitigation typically evolves. Although changes to the project during the process creates more work between the draft and the final EIS, the changes also meet the intent of SEPA, which is to result in an environmentally improved project. Decision makers will ultimately decide whether that refined project should be approved with conditions, or denied. And lastly, a final EIS includes responses to public comments, more analysis when warranted, responding to those comments, new analysis responding to project changes, and more or refined mitigation. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I appreciate you letting me get through that. Are there any questions that follow-up questions that anybody has?
Thank you, Ms. Betts, for your very thorough description of what to expect in each section and how to review the EIS. I think that serves the council well, and hopefully also the people who are listening and participating on this call as they review it and look and prepare comments. Again, once the draft EIS is published, it will be 45 days from that you will have an opportunity to comment. Are there questions from the Horse Heaven council members? Mr. Levitt?
I have one brief question. Can you talk briefly about, I see there's 7 agencies that provided scoping comments, and just from a technical standpoint, how you go about integrating feedback on the scope. And I also see there were no tribal comments during the scoping. Could you just briefly talk about the scoping comments, please?
I'm sorry, this is Brianna, the stenographer. Can I ask who the last speaker was?
This is Eli Levitt, Department of Ecology.
Thank you.
Well, if I remember correctly, I don't remember exactly which those 7 agencies were, but basically what happens is that we follow up with all those agencies as we're working on preparing the draft EIS. We get clarification from them on what their concerns are, but then we include them to assist us with clearly collect if we need to collect additional information, if we need to actually do some additional work either with the applicant. In at least one case, we brought everybody together and not only kind of like figured out how to define the project, how to identify the impacts, but also to discuss mitigation and come up with additional ideas for mitigation. And some of those things would ended up being applicant commitments, and some of those ended up being additional mitigation that based on feedback from those agencies and our consultant, et cetera, we identified additional mitigation that was warranted. We also did actually do a great deal of outreach with the Yakima tribe or the Yakima Nation, and we are continuing to do that work or communications with them, with their staff, I should say. And it's the same kind of thing where we are working with them to understand what their concerns are, to see if there is, and so that clearly articulate what the impacts are in the EIS, and also to investigate possible mitigation. As I mentioned to you, there were about 6 different kinds of mitigation, anywhere from avoidance to monitoring, to investigate then what kinds of mitigation might be most appropriate and feasible for the impacts that have been identified. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I also see that there are general scoping comments that don't come from agencies, so I imagine we or you, EFSEC, review them and consider them when drafting the draft EIS.
Absolutely. Our first and foremost responsibility during scoping is to consider all comments that were received and use those to determine what we need to investigate and collect additional information for. I believe, and perhaps maybe Amy Moon or Amy Hofkemeyer can confirm, I believe we do have a scoping report. Is
scoping report. So
and this is Amy Moon.
Yes, thank you. A scoping report doesn't ring a bell, Patty. I would have to look at that. But I did just want to confirm with you, Eli, when you said that there were 7 agencies, do you mean the scoping comments that are posted to the Horse Heaven project on the EFSEC public website?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we don't have tribal comments posted there, but as Patty said, we have been working with pretty closely with staff at the Yakima Nation on that. But so Eli, I'll have to report back next month if there is a scoping report, because that's just not ringing a bell, Patty.
Okay, well, and it may not have been called a scoping report. We did we used our consultant to assist us to review all of the scoping comments and basically identified the kinds of comments that we received, you know, the extent of those comments, and then ultimately determined which ones needed to be carried forward into the draft EIS. Some of the comments may not have been, you know, qualified as substantive kinds of comments that were appropriate for an environmental impact statement. But we have, you might say, some documentation about what we received during scoping and then how that fed into the scope that was set for the environmental impact statement.
Yeah, and Patty, this is Amy again, and Eli, and the EFSEC Council, is we did issue a memorandum to the SEPA responsible official, which is Sonia Bumpus, that did summarize scoping of what the DEIS would include. And that was September 20th of 2021.
Thank you, Amy. They're oftentimes called scoping reports, but a scoping memorandum is another type of the same kind of document.
Any more questions?
That answer your question, Eli?
Yes, it does. I mean, there's lots of interesting ideas in some of those scoping comments, like studying the traffic, the dust, the light, the views. So it'll be interesting to see what's in the draft EIS when we're ready to review it.
Thank you. Are there questions from other council members for the Horse Heaven Council?
Chair Drew, this is Kay Kelly.
Go ahead.
The question I have is, when we went to visit the Horse Heaven site, and thank you EFSEC staff for that wonderful visit. You aren't responsible for the weather. It seemed like the project was not in a defined state of planning, that there were some parts and pieces that still needed to be settled on. So when the EIS is conducted, does it take into account that it would be full build out, or how does that work if the project is ultimately changed once we get close to final, or if we get close to final?
So first off, the applicant has identified what they believe to be the maximum footprint, with the understanding that it will probably not be the maximum, but that they wanted the flexibility to choose between the three solar array locations, to choose between the taller, fewer turbines and or the shorter, 244 shorter turbines or 150 taller turbines. So they have identified what they believe to be the maximum footprint, and that was analyzed in the EIS. If the applicant changes their proposal, and let's just say, for example, they decide that there's some acreage somewhere that they had not originally anticipated they wanted to use, but they now want to use that acreage, and it's added to the proposal, we have to re-examine that from a SEPA perspective. But that it could trigger a supplemental EIS, or it could trigger an addendum to the EIS. And it just depends on whether or not the proposal changes enough, or the additional impacts, there are new or greater impacts, a large additional acreage, and maybe sensitive habitats, etc. All those factors are taken into consideration. The bottom line is that we have to document that in a SEPA document. We have to analyze that in a SEPA document. And if the changes are significant enough from an adverse environmental impact perspective, then we could potentially be pushed into a supplemental EIS. That's partly why the applicant has provided this quote unquote maximum footprint information to us, hoping that we've got it covered in this first draft EIS. But as I mentioned, changes can occur if the proposal gets smaller, or some aspects of the proposal are removed. Let's just say, for example, they decided they didn't want to do battery energy storage. Well, that wouldn't be the kind of change that would trigger really more than just an addendum, for example, a minor, or just or would just be acknowledged in the final EIS. So that might kind of give you some idea as to, we do have to document it, we do have to analyze it, but it does, there's a couple of pathways that we might end up use for dealing with it.
If I can also add on that, what Ms. Bessett's describing is what the applicant might choose to do, but it is ultimately the responsibility of this Horse Heaven EFSEC Council to make a recommendation to the governor, which includes the elements of the EIS as information to deliberate, as well as the adjudicative process, which we'll talk about next. And so the council does have the flexibility to look at all of those overall impacts and make a recommendation to the governor that is specific to the information that we have received throughout the process. And then the governor has the choices whether to accept our recommendation, whether to reject our recommendation, or whether to ask us, send it back to us for more work. So although the applicant has submitted what they consider to be the maximum footprint and the information within that, the council also has a responsibility to look at all that information and to make deliberate and make that recommendation to the governor as we see the information provides us.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? Okay, hearing none, I think we are moving from this to the adjudication update from Judge Torum. Judge Torum?
All right, thank you, Chair Drew. I think my unmuting was successful.
It is.
Okay, very well. Council members, this is Judge Torum. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll try to be brief today, given what you've learned about what to expect when the draft environmental impact statement comes out. Once we have a firm date for publication, I've been working with staff to develop what's called the order commencing adjudication. And absent any concern from the council, here's pretty much the plan. Once we have the a firm date for publication, we'll be commencing the adjudication, and that's required by the statute and under our administrative code provisions by telling the public we're ready to go forward. We're going to do an interactive process under the Administrative Procedures Act in a format more familiarly known as a hearing. This allows us to hear about various disputed issues that might come up from the application itself, from the environmental review process, and anything else leading up to your recommendation to the governor. So this is a chance to go beyond the documents, and we're going to have a chance to hear from expert witnesses on both sides, as well as members of the public. So that's where the adjudication is what it's going to be. For now, we have this order drafted up, notifying the public we're starting a chance to assemble who's going to be a party to this and have a chance to participate, just like in a lawsuit or any other hearing format, as a formal party, not just to state their opposition to or support of the project, but formally introduce topics to you, sponsor witnesses, and go forward and state things that they want you to do with the application and based on environmental review and expert testimony, including, as the chair said, setting conditions, maybe limiting certain things, inquiring further of the applicant, and making that ultimate decision. Should this project go forward or not? Many of you work for agencies that will be part and parcel, not only as you are serving as members on the council, but your state agencies may become formal parties of record. The other parties you can expect to see will be the applicant, counsel for the environment, and any of the agencies that you serve may formally choose to take an active role and be a party. The county will also be a formal party to this, and Benton County will have a vote on the council, but they'll also have representatives in front of you. Some of you may remember they participated in the land use consistency hearing a year ago, March. So the county will be there. The agencies that you represent may or may not be actively involved, Council for the Environment and Scout Clean Energy, and then folks that want to intervene formally as a party. This order commencing adjudication is going to set a deadline, probably co-terminus with the end of the DEIS comment period, but enough time for folks to know what's in the DEIS and the application to decide formally, is there an issue on which they want to offer testimony for you to consider in making your recommendation. We were hoping it would be sometime in January, but it may push into February. We'll know a lot more once we hear from Amy Moon formally. When are we going to get this published? The order is also going to set up a chance for other parties to object to any interveners who might want to participate as a party, and then we'll have to make some rulings. When I say we, it'll be me in conjunction with John Thompson at the AG's office and other EFSEC staff, and we'll be deciding who comes in under our rules as an intervener and who does not, and then in what capacity and what scope of topic they're going to participate. The other thing that's going to happen in the commencement of the adjudication is setting up yet another opportunity for public comment. The way the EFSEC statute currently reads, a lot of people have made comments up to this point, but if they want to participate in the hearing process or the adjudication process, they've got to file a new public comment in writing, and we have to give a deadline for that. That'll be published in this order as well. I'm trying to look at my notes and see if there's anything else I can tell you today. I guess the last thing is you can expect to see notice of a pre-hearing conference. And it's at that first pre-hearing conference when we'll know and identify who the interveners are, that we'll actually be able to sit down with those parties and sort out which are the issues in dispute that need to be litigated. We'll establish the hearing procedures, including formal discovery, as it would be in a lawsuit. And then we'll start setting up a presentation schedule for the evidence. And that's where I'm going to need your help, and staff will be reaching out to you to find out somewhere in the April and May timeframes, maybe into June, periods of time when you're not available to be present at a hearing. Chair Drew advises that this hearing is going to be virtual, so there won't be a lot of travel, if any, involved. And once we figure out your non-availability, could be around other commitments you already have, including family commitments for school or spring break type things, but we'll probably be seeking out your availability for late March, April, May, and possibly into early June. Currently, the application has been extended, I believe, to July 8th of 2023, and that's the current target date we have to get the recommendation to the governor. So the adjudication will kick off as soon as we know when the DEIS is going to be ready, so these processes can go forward on parallel tracks. And that's what you can expect as far as scheduling and basically what's going to happen between now and early next year. Chair Drew, anything else you want me to go into about the order commencing adjudication?
Thank you. As I understand it, it will be an order written by you, but at this point, if council members have any questions or concerns about what was laid out, this could be an appropriate time, or you could also contact Sonia Bumpus, or that would probably be the best, and she can communicate them with Judge Torum as well. But are there any questions or concerns at this point in time? I know this is just coming at you, so you may take a little while to think about it as well. Thank you, Judge Torum. I think at this point, so the council will not be voting on this order is what I'm saying. It will be an order by Judge Torum, as is provided in the APA.
That's correct.
So, yes.
So this order and the pre-hearing conference orders will come out under my signature, but they'll certainly have been developed with consultation with EFSEC staff. And Chair Drew is aware of what we're doing to make sure that the adjudication scheduling goes forward. Council involvement in that will be, again, when are you available, when are you not available, attendance limitations.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. Moving on to the Goose Prairie Solar Project update, Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. For the record, this is Amy Hofgemeyer. Sorry. For the record, this is Amy Hofgemeyer. EFSEC staff are working with the certificate holder and our contractors to review and refine pre-construction plans. In particular, staff are coordinating with the certificate holder on revisions to the initial site restoration plan, which will come to the council for review and approval once fully refined. There are no further updates at this time. Are there any questions?
Any questions? No, thank you. Moving on to the Badger Mountain project update. Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, this is Amy Hofgemeyer for the record. Staff have been working with our contractor in the initial stages of drafting the Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS. We are also coordinating with Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Archaeological and Historical Preservation on multiple incoming supplemental reports, which will be posted to the website once finalized. Are there any questions?
Are those additional reports part of the EIS or separate from the EIS?
The information from those reports will be incorporated into the EIS. There's some additional field work being conducted or has recently been conducted that is being finalized in coordination with these agencies to provide to staff for our use.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Moving on to the Whistling Ridge project update, Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. EFSEC staff are waiting for the certificate holder to submit the remaining materials for the SCA amendment request, and there are no further updates at this time.
Thank you. Moving on to the High Top and Ostria project update, Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the council for their attendance at the November 2nd site visit. And as you will recall, at the October 18th council meeting, EFSEC staff presented the revised mitigated determination of non-significance issued for the High Top and Ostria projects. And the council also voted on the land use consistency order, deeming the proposal consistent with local land use codes. With these two criteria being met, the council directed staff to prepare an order granting expedited process for this application. In your council packets, you'll find this draft order prepared by Judge Bradley, EFSEC staff, and our attorney, John Thompson. And at this time, staff recommends that the council approves the order granting expedited process to this application. Are there any questions?
Yes, did we receive any comments on this expedited process order?
No comments were received on this action.
Thank you. So in front of you is Council Order number 885 that walks through the background, the land use consistency finding, the SEPA mitigated determination of non-significance, the revised MDNS, finding of facts about the project itself, to page 4, the conclusions of law. 1, the council has jurisdiction over the subject matter of this proceeding and the parties to it pursuant to RCW 8050.075 and WAC Chapter 46343. 2, the council provided adequate notice to interested parties and the council has adequate information to render a land use consistency decision, which we did at the last meeting. The applicant has met its burden of proof of demonstrating that the sites are consistent and in compliance with Yakima County's comprehensive plan and applicable zoning ordinances as required by RCW 8050-075 sub 1. 4, the environmental impact of the proposed high top and Ostrea facility can be mitigated to a non-significant level under RCW 4321C031 as required by RCW 8050-075 sub 1. 5, the criteria for expedited processing set forth in RCW 8050-090 and WAC 463-43050 as of the date of the application have been satisfied, and therefore the applicant's request for expedited processing should be granted. The council orders Cypress Creek Renewable LLC's request for expedited processing is granted. EFSEC will evaluate Cypress Creek Renewable LLC's application for site certification of the High Top and Ostrea facility in an expedited process consistent with requirements of RCW 8050-075, RCW 8050-090, and WAC Chapter 46343. You've heard the motion, the order before us. Is there someone who would like to make a motion to approve the order granting expedited processing of the application for site certification of the High Top and Ostrea projects?
Lenny Young, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Eli Levitt, second.
Okay, Mr. Levitt, second. Thank you. Is there discussion? As we have heard, both the pieces that are required for expedited processing have been completed. So all those in favor of approving the order granting expedited processing for the High Top and Ostrea project, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
The motion is adopted. Thank you. We now are moving to the Watoma Solar Project. Project update. Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you again, Council, for your attendance at the November 2nd site visit. Staff hoped that these site visits were informative to your review of projects and your decision making. Staff continue to work with the applicant and our contractors to review the application. The applicant submitted their responses to the first data request on November 10th, which staff are now reviewing and will be posted to the project website. Staff are also working on a second data request, the responses to which we anticipate will provide the remaining information needed for the SEPA threshold determination. Are there any questions before I move on to the draft order?
Any questions from council members? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Next, I would like to bring your attention to the draft land use order provided in your packets, prepared by Judge Gerard, EFSEC staff, and our attorney, John Thompson. While open for public comment, EFSEC received some recommended substantive edits for your consideration. The first being to add Council Member Dave Sharp to the list of council members on page 2, paragraph 3. And the second edit would be to remove 9 landowners listed on page 3, paragraph 8. This proposed edit would correct the number of parcels to 35 from 57 and end the list after United States government. The landowners listed in that paragraph after United States government are adjacent to but not included in the proposed facility. And I'd like to pause for a moment and ask if there are any questions or concerns about the proposed edits.
Any questions about the proposed edits?
This is Judge Gerard. Based on those edits, after Rob and Robert, there should be an and for United States government if that is the last, is going to be the last listed parcel owner.
So then adding an
Staff
and
can
in
make that edit. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So before you is an order finding the project inconsistent with land use regulations and walks through the background, the land use consistency hearing, the applicant's description of the proposed facility, the change in paragraph 8 from 53 down to 35 parcels, which includes those which will be, the project will be located on. Adding adding the word "and" after Robin Robert before the United States government. Excuse me, on the first page or the second page, adding Dave Sharp in the appropriate location with the council members. In paragraph 3, I missed that. Definitions of the land use plan and zoning ordinances. Findings of fact about the application submitted. The project would be a 470 megawatt photovoltaic generation facility coupled with a 4-hour battery energy storage system, as well as related interconnections and ancillary support infrastructure. The public meeting we held on August 8th, that the project is located in unincorporated Benton County, and the primary land use of the parcels of the project would be for solar power generators. And on December 21st of 2021, the Board of County Commissioners for Benton County adopted a Benton County ordinance amendment which removed the conditional use permit option for commercial solar power generation facility major from the Growth Management Act Agricultural District. And therefore our conclusions of law, the council has jurisdiction. Council provided adequate notice to interested parties. The definition of solar power generator facility major and the definition of solar power generator facility minor. The primary land use, paragraph 5, would be for commercial solar power generation and not primarily to offset part or all of the applicant's requirement for electricity. And therefore it is a solar power generator facility major. And because of the ordinance passed on December 21st, 2021, solar power generator facilities major may not apply for a conditional use permit for lands within the Growth Management Agricultural District in Benton County. The applicant filed for the application on June 9th, 2022. The project site is not in compliance with Benton County's applicable zoning ordinances. And then paragraph 8, pursuant to the Washington Administrative Code 463-28-060 and 070, the matter will be scheduled for an adjudication to consider whether the council should recommend to the governor that the state preempt Benton County's land use plans, zoning ordinances, or other development regulations for the site or portions of the site for the proposed facility, and if so, to determine conditions to be included in a draft site certification agreement that consider local governmental or community interests affected by the construction or operation of the alternative energy resource and the purposes of the ordinances to be preempted pursuant to RCW 8050-110 sub 2. So the council orders that Interjects Renewable Development USA LLC's ASC is not consistent with local zoning regulations. The matter shall be set for adjudication concurrent with the general adjudication required by RCW 8050-0904 sub 4 to consider whether to recommend preemption of Benton County zoning regulations. If the environmental impact of the proposed facility is determined by the EFSEC responsible official to be non-significant, or if the facility's impacts will be mitigated to a non-significant level, the council may limit the topic of the general adjudicative proceeding required by RCW 80-50-090 sub 4 to whether any land use plans or zoning ordinances with which the proposed site is determined to be inconsistent should be preempted. That is the order which is scheduled for consideration today. Is there a motion to bring that proposed order before the council?
Lenny Young, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Stacy Brewster, second.
Are there questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor of approving the order determining that the proposed Watoma solar project site is not consistent or in compliance with Benton County land use regulations, and to set for adjudication the matter of whether to recommend preemption of Benton County zoning regulations, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? The motion is adopted. Thank you. Come to the end of a rather long agenda here today, but we do have one more item for the council and the public. We do have two new staff people who have joined the EFSEC team. Ms. Hofgemeyer.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to introduce two of our new staff members. EFSEC has brought on board two new siting specialists to join our team. First is Lance Caputo, who joined us on October 31st, and he will be overseeing the Watoma project going forward.
Lance, do you want to say hello?
Yes, thank you. I look forward to a very productive relationship with the council, and we're going to get a lot done. I'm very excited about this opportunity.
Thank you and welcome to the team.
And next, I would like to introduce John Barnes, who is also new to EFSEC, and his first day was yesterday, so he's even a little bit newer than Lance. He is our other siting specialist who we've brought on board, and he will be overseeing applicants or review of new applications, and he has yet to be assigned a project. But welcome, John and Lance, both of you.
Hello, John. Would you like to say hello?
Yes, thank you, Council, for having me, and everyone. It's good to be here with the Environmental Site Evaluation Council. Super excited to be here and work on alternative energy projects throughout the state, and so just excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome to the team. With that, our meeting is adjourned.